This show is sponsored by Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den 10, you're giving back on a global scale. Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. Before I introduce my guest, I just want to invite all of you to our new mastermind. It's called Take Action Mastermind, and it is for entrepreneurs in the beginning stages. If you have an idea, a thought, a vision, something that you want to create and are just thinking about it, or if you've already started your vision and are anywhere from 0 to 3 years in the process and the journey, please just visit michaelespositoinc.com to learn more about the mastermind. Let's get started. My guest today spent a decade in consulting, and he was totally burnt out. I'm sure many of you can relate with that. The long hours, back-to-back meetings, and high stress took a heavy toll. He started experiencing anxiety attacks and felt like a shell of his former self. To help untangle his brain, he and his wife took a long surf and yoga trip to Costa Rica. It was an incredible experience, providing the space to slow down and focus him in a way he had never done in a long time. As soon as they returned, he was inspired to create this type of experience for other high-achieving professionals. He knows what it's like to work in high-pressure environments and the impact that intentional time away can have on calming the nervous system. So they curate the type of small batch, white glove experiences that, if he had gone through when he was in consulting, would have prevented him from all the burnout. Please welcome founder of Sand and Salt Escapes, Max Schneider. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for the conversation today.
This is so cool. I want to share with you and I want to share with everybody listening here is, as many of you know, I have an intake form. And I kind of give the option to my guest to either fill it all out or just share some links to different articles or videos that might, or podcasts that previously that they've done that might help me better learn more about them. And so the first link I clicked on without knowing anything about you, Max, was the YouTube link that you sent me. And so I went down this like rabbit hole of watching these YouTubers going across the world and everything. And so I was just like, oh, cool. I have this like travel vlogger coming on the show today. So I start preparing my mind on those kinds of questions. And, you know, reading your bio, it didn't help because you said you and your wife. And this vlogger is with his wife and everything. So I'm just like, oh, this is really neat. All right. So how am I going to learn about him through all of these travel vlogs, though? So it was only until I got to the articles that I was like, all right, actually, I get it now. What's going on here?
Oh, that's amazing. So that must have been David and Skylar. So shout out Davey and Sky Media.
Yes.
They are incredible travel vloggers from up in Canada, and they have documented everything that we've done for Sand and Salt Escapes. They're our go-to videographers and photographers. So all the content we've ever produced comes from them. But what a joy to get to go down a rabbit hole with the two of them on YouTube. I love watching their videos. They're the best. Yeah.
And I did end up subscribing because I was like, this is pretty neat. I didn't get to the video. I saw that they did, I think, 10 cool things in Ireland. And I was like, this is my wife's dream to go to Ireland. And I've promised her to do that. So I was like, all right, I gotta tag that one. That's the one I'm going to be watching next so that I can figure this out with Devin.
That's amazing. Yeah, they're phenomenal people. And we actually just met very randomly online when I first started the company. I knew that we had to have very high quality content and social proof to be able to share. So I needed to find somebody who was crazy enough to just accept a random invitation to come down to Costa Rica from a stranger that they had never met. And it took a few attempts at reaching out to some travel vloggers and bloggers online, but ended up reaching out to David and Skylar. They responded and we met for the first time in Costa Rica. about almost 2 years ago, and actually coming back with us again in June for our 11th retreat to capture some more content. So yeah, that's, I like to joke, the only people are crazy enough to just to accept a random invite from a random person to come down to Costa Rica, and that it all worked out really well.
I love that. I love the random invites and the random requests. I think that, that's definitely something we're going to be speaking more about in terms of, you bootstrapped at your company, and so many entrepreneurs, business leaders are met with failures or setbacks, and it's really because they only tried once. And so I love that you're talking about that it took more than one attempt. So we're definitely going to dive into that. I want to kind of, unless you have something on it that you want to say right now, go ahead.
No, it's all good. Yeah, you just talked about like failing once or twice. It's like, yeah, that's the entire process of being an entrepreneur, is just tripping over yourself, picking yourself back up and learning on the next step, and then tripping again. Yeah.
And that's the greatest part about it, is that it's just a learning process. I listened to Brennan Burchard in Growth Day, and this morning's Daily Fire, he was just talking about that as entrepreneurs, as people that, are always looking to grow, is that we're just like the universe. We're forever expanding. And if we have the mindset of the universe, and that the universe never stops expanding, we never stop expanding and continuously grow. But there are points in our life that we feel like there is no growth, that we are stagnant, that we've plateaued, and that there's almost no change in our lives and therefore no future, which leads to a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of self-doubting. And for a high achiever like yourself, it sounds like you started experiencing some of this stuff in the consulting world. Can you share with us a little bit about that experience? Share with us, the beginning stages, because I'm sure it started off great. You rolled up into management. You started working with Fortune 100 companies. You were really a high flyer, I'm sure, young guy. So you were on a huge trajectory of success. So share with us a little bit about the beginning stages and then where it kind of hit that wall.
Yeah, it was the beginning stages of consulting for me it was everything that I had ever dreamed of. Because prior to starting consulting, I'd actually gone to law school. I did that straight out of undergrad. And a year into law school, I realized that this is not the way that I wanted to spend my career. I had done mock trial in high school and in undergrad, and kind of had an idea of what it would be like to practice law. But then when I got to law school and realized, oh God, it's absolutely nothing like what I thought it was going to be. I got it out for a year and then picked up and kind of had what I like to refer to as like my first panic moment, when I picked up and went down to El Salvador for 3 months, just to clear my mind, get away, and get a chance to tune back into myself. And while I was there, I was doing a lot of reflection on just the type of work that I like to do. And I knew that I love creative problem solving. I knew that I love working with people. I knew that I love being in front of audiences, speaking. And those ideas, those concepts really led me into the field of consulting. So the moment that I arrived there, I was so excited because I was able to get into doing exactly what I wanted to do. I was traveling 200,000 miles a year, chasing companies like Microsoft all around the world, getting a chance to work with a lot of their country general managers, corporate vice presidents, and getting some incredible exposure at a really young age. And those beginning years were an absolute blast. I did 200,000 miles a year in the air for 5 or 6 years. And finally, I kind of got to the point where I was wearing down. I got shingles, which was my first experience with my body starting to really signal to me that the stress and the lifestyle wasn't a sustainable one. So I got shingles in my late 20s, and that was right around the time where I raised my hand and said, hey, I know that I asked to travel as much as possible, but I don't want to do it like this any longer. I need to be a little bit more local. So I ended up getting put on I was based in Chicago at the time, and got put on a couple of more local clients, actually in the insurance space, which I know you have familiarity with, and spent my last years in consulting more in the Midwest in the financial services and insurance industries. But it was definitely a big change, taking the Amtrak from Chicago to Milwaukee every week versus hopping on a plane and flying to Singapore or London. But it was a very welcome change at that point in my life. And those years of that heavy travel had to wind down at some point, but it was an absolute blast. I got a chance to learn so much through that process.
Man, I can't I can't imagine the stress of the time changes when you're talking about London to Singapore to, I think about, just the stress of sleep, of not sleeping, added on to the career and the high pressure from the career.
And the food that you eat in the process of it too. I mean, I can't tell you how many airplane meals I had, how many meals I had in lounges. Yeah, it was just absolutely brutal on the body. There would be weeks where I would go from like Chicago to Seattle, touch back in Chicago for a day, unpack my suitcase, go over to London, come back from London for a day, fly out to Singapore, come back, and then you're just jetting off. It was international at least once a month for years, which I am not complaining about it at all. It was a phenomenal experience, but it's just not a sustainable one because, to your point, my sleep schedule was so erratic. The food that I was eating was just so drenched in sodium and preservatives. And then you're out getting drinks in the evening time. And then when you are back at home, all you want to do is just sleep and rest. But those moments are so few and far between. So I turned into pretty much a walking zombie, just reacting and like almost like a ping pong ball, just bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with no real intentionality behind what I was doing.
I want to go back for a second here and to when you were talking about your first signal, which was, it sounds like it was prior to you asking to kind of stay local. It was right before you started jet setting. The first signal that you had and you took time to reflect. Two questions there. The first question I have in terms of this is we'll be speaking a lot about burnout. This is the huge turning point in not this moment, but burnout is one of the huge turning points in what started the business for you that you're in today. So I want to make sure that we identify some of the signs to burnout. And they don't all happen at once, obviously. It's not just one big fire that you say, all right, that's it, I'm out of the building. It's these little signals. And so I want to go back to that initial signal of what it was, and then I want to kind of just dive into a little bit deeper into the reflection that you did, because I really love that reflection that you did. And that's another great point there in that we reflect, and when we reflect on things and come up with our values or what it is that we're searching for, it doesn't always mean that that's going to be what our passion is for lifelong. It's going to change, but it's right for the moment. So I'm very curious on those two moments of like, what was the signal to that first burnout, and how did you reflect and discover those initial values?
The signal for the first burnout happened when we were in Denver. And this was just like the lifestyle kind of we were pushing at that time, where it was just push in every aspect of your life, where I actually flew straight from a client engagement in China to Denver to see a concert at Red Rocks. And while we were there, if any listeners are familiar with the Manitou Incline, it's in Colorado Springs. So just outside of Denver, and it's right by the Olympic Training Committee. And it's on the side of Pikes Peak. It's about 0.8 of a mile old rail track that goes up the side of Pikes Peak. And the rails are different heights. They're in different positions. Some of them are like 6 feet apart or 6 inches apart. Others are about 3 feet apart. Sometimes you're like going at very steep angles to get to the top of this thing. And it's at about a mile of elevation. And they use it for training for the Olympics. And when we were out there, we thought, it'd be really fun to go run this and see kind of what time we could run. So had been training ahead of time for it. We lived in a 52-story building in Chicago. So I was just running up and down the stairs when we were there. So it was like literally fly from China to Denver for a concert where we were like partying, having fun with that. And then we drove out to Colorado Springs. And I remember being at the very bottom of the Manitou Incline right before we were going to start running it, and feeling like right in my lymph nodes, right around my hip area, were feeling really weird. And I thought, that's interesting. Why am I so tender right there? And we just continued the weekend. And as the weekend continued, I kept feeling more tenderness. And then my wife is a physical therapist, and she has her own practice, and she's wired the same way that I am, same way that I know probably you are, and a lot of your listeners are, where you just continue to push through things. She had shingles 6 months prior. And I gave her so much flack about it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, you're not supposed to get shingles in your 20s. Like this happens when you're much older. So when the shingles then started surfacing, we were able to identify it pretty easily because we realized like, oh gosh, that's exactly what you had 6 months ago. So it was a little bit of a shot across the bow where we both realized like, okay, we're both in our 20s at this point. We both had shingles within 6 months of each other. And when you kind of step back and look at like the way that we were pushing across every aspect of our life, there was just no rest whatsoever. And we then have realized, okay, we probably need to start changing some things up. That was the first time we had that thought. We didn't do a good job of changing anything at that point. It took a few more shots across the bow. Including we've had my wife's had melanoma a couple of times. Both times we've been fortunate to catch it and get it out. But those both came after very acute periods of prolonged stress that have also kind of helped us change. And you just have these moments along the way where you realize when your body's starting to speak out against the way that you're treating it, that you've got to change some things. And I'm really fortunate that we've not had anything like too serious happen along those along that front. We've learned a lot from it and we've made a lot of changes. But that first time, when we were at the bottom of the Manitou incline, I remember feeling like right around my lymph nodes, my hip, going, oh, this doesn't feel right. Something's going on here.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because burnout can happen in so many different ways. And like you just described, from you're doing it in every area of your life, and you're saying, you're traveling for work, and then you're trying to make it fun by going to a concert and by doing something that's also fun and a great experience with friends and family, obviously. But obviously your body's saying no to it. And I think it's important that we do pay attention to our body's signals. You're 100% right. I've done some exercises where, I get a shot in the knee. And this is like recent, this is why I'm saying it. Get a shot in the knee, and I'm just like, gotta push through it, gotta get to my 100 squats, whatever it is that I'm doing. I do more like hit versus weight heavy. And so, of course, you push through it, and then guess what happens? Like a day or two later, you're like, I can't walk. Why can't I walk? So I think
every time.
I'm so happy that you touched on that. The signals of our body are huge. We talk about the mental signals, but we also have the physical signals. And the rest component, you just mentioned it, never resting. And I know we're going to get into rest because, your business is based around rest and recovery. So the rest component, never resting. Let's go into a little bit of the reflections that you did. This was early stages for you before you really started, or I'm making an assumption here based off of what I've learned about your story here, but this is early stages here before you really got into yoga and got into other types of breathing exercises. So what was the initial phase for you in terms of the reflection? I ask this in this sense because many people listening right now might not be as far along as you or I are in terms of mindfulness or meditation or anything of that nature. So if we could kind of put our beginner's mind back on of like, what was it first like when you were reflecting?
I think you, over time, build what I would describe almost as like a heightened sensitivity to the signals that your body is sending. And what I mean by that is early on, the signals that you can most easily read are the big ones. It's tougher to find the more nuanced signals. So things like shingles, very easy to identify. As my career progressed, anxiety attacks at the airport, on calls, very easy to identify. And as you start tuning in, as you start paying attention, you can start to notice the more nuanced things. And meditation for me, and just building out that my own mindfulness practice through a number of different mediums, has been so helpful when I can start to feel my anxiety coming on in like different spots in my body. So for me, anxiety really manifests kind of right around my chest, right around my solar plexus. I know that if I'm like anxious, that's it's also a very big emotional processing center for your body as a human being. And so I hold a lot of anxiety in there. So as I've kind of grown in my journey and getting to be able to observe this and know this, one of the things that really helps for me is actually rolling the fascia around my solar plexus when I'm feeling very anxious, or if I had a very anxious day the day before. I know that spot on my chest is going to be really tender. And so rolling the fascia there is something that actually helps physically release a lot of that anxiety and kind of getting a chance to address it from more of a somatic perspective. So that's been, for me, kind of my journey through yoga, through mindfulness, through breath work, and really understanding how do I slow down and listen to my body and just observe and see what my body's telling me. Because, I mean, ultimately, we experience life through our bodies. It's the vehicle through which we do it. Our bodies are only able to be in the present moment. Our bodies can't be in the past. Our bodies can't be in the future. Our bodies can't be thinking about a project, but that's where our mind generally is. Our mind generally reflecting on things that happened in the past, like making you feel like regret or guilt, or you're getting really worried about what's going to happen in the future and you're feeling anxious. You're thinking about projects. You're just like scenario planning is something that I'm so guilty of constantly. Your mind's just always like playing things out. But when we can quiet that, and we can slow down and learn how to like connect with the body, because the body's always here and the body's what we're experiencing life through. There's so much that you can observe and so much that you can learn about your experience and improve the way that you experience life if you take that time to actually slow down. So that's been a massive kind of unlock in the journey for me of starting with only being able to receive like these very heavy signals of it. You've got shingles. That you're in the middle of an anxiety attack. Those are the bigger ones. But over time, when you start paying attention, you continue practicing mindfulness, you continue just learning how to slow down and listen to your body, you can start to observe the smaller signals and the more nuanced things and be able to just become a little bit more unified with your body and your mind.
Yeah, and you can cut them off before they manifest into something greater. I mean,
Absolutely.
I remember an anxiety, when you said the airport, I remember an anxiety attack I had years ago. I was just getting on a plane to go to Miami. I was with my family, thankfully. And at the time, it was just my sister and my brother. But my sister was well experienced in being able to help with that. But at the time, it manifested into what many feel, which is the walls are closing in, everything is, collapsing, and you're sick from it. I got on the plane, of course, and went to Miami that weekend. I forget how long the trip was for, but the entire trip I was sick because of this. And, when you learn mindfulness, which is what we'll be talking a lot more about too, because I know that you have some really great mindfulness stories for our entrepreneurs that we'll be getting into a little bit later in the show. But when you learn it, I've dealt with things as an entrepreneur today, and I'm sure you have as well, that are far more anxiety causing than that moment that I had in Florida. And yet I don't get to that point. And it's exactly to what you just said. It's that now I'm like, okay, I get it here too, where my chest is just like, oof, that's hurting. And it's realizing, I got to breathe, practice a little gratitude, realize what is, the bigger picture in all of this. And, I'm curious on your thoughts on all of that, but it's a game changer when you could start identifying those small nuances, like you said.
Absolutely. It's a huge game changer. And the way that I've really come to understand it and the way that helps me make it very pragmatic for myself is it's training your mind. The way that you talked about exercising, going and doing 100 squats, that's going to be really helpful for you when you've got to go in the bottom cabinet in the kitchen and be able to reach underneath to grab the blender that's stuck back behind the other bowls. But that mobility, that strength, that's super helpful for you for it. And we talk about mindfulness, we talk about meditation. We're not meditating to be great meditators. I mean, maybe some people are, but that's not, I think, the way that I approach it. I approach it because I want to meditate to train my mind so that I can experience life with a little bit more peace, with a little bit more fluidity to it, and a little bit more connection to life itself. And that's the purpose of it. It's to train your mind.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great way to express all of that. So, yeah, you took that moment in the beginning phases. I love how you touched on how the signals led you to that, to be able to reflect and be mindful in that moment and kind of write out your values. And I just want to point out to everybody what some of those values at the time were, because I think there's going to be a big contrast, but also we'll see some similarities in what they are today. And it was to help others, it was to travel, it was exposure to new things and discover new things. So I think it's so important to talk about this because we, I speak about this whenever I train on public speaking and work with entrepreneurs. It's vital that as entrepreneurs, it's vital that as business leaders and executives, that we know why we're doing something and that we're passionate about it. And for you in that moment, you discovered what it was, you started jet setting and it was working out well. And then you got to your second breakdown, which is when you went more localized. And so I'm going to bring us back to where we kind of left off before we went back in time. So now you were back home, you're local, you're riding the train. Maybe things have kind of cooled down for you. Tell us more about what started happening as you transitioned from doing 200,000 miles in the air to now going a little bit more local, and how things started transpiring from there.
At first, it was a lot of relief. It was just really nice to be in the same time zone and just feel a little bit more settled. As that continued to play out, I was going from Chicago to Milwaukee on the Amtrak every week, and that was a lot of cold weather. It was one of the polar vortex years, and with all the travel I had been doing up to that point, I had missed every snowstorm in Chicago for like 6 years at that point. Every time I would be gone, I would talk to my wife, and she'd be like, "You cannot believe it. It's snowing again, and you're not here." It was kind of funny at first. I think it got to the point where it was just like, I was just never home, and she would just be stuck there in like negative 20 degrees in the wintertime, and I would be like across in Europe or somewhere like that. So it was a little bit of a running bit for us that I was just never there for snow. And then I got assigned to a client in Milwaukee. So during a polar vortex year. So that was a very big eye-opening moment for me, where I looked at her and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is what you've been dealing with this entire time." Like, yeah, I'm ready to go. So we ended up picking up and we moved out to Los Angeles in 2020. Right in the beginning stages of COVID, which is a perfect time to move across the country. But it was amazing for us because we had just gotten to this point. I mean, as I think you kind of do in your like 20s, early 30s, where some of that city life can start to weigh you down a little bit. And in Chicago, it's a phenomenal city, but it's just a lot of eating and drinking, and there's not a lot of outdoor access. And we wanted that outdoor access. So we moved out here. We started surfing. We hike every weekend. At least we spent a ton of time up in Joshua Tree as well. But the access to the outdoors here has just been absolutely phenomenal. And I think it really fed our soul a lot in that transition of coming out here. And it was, you talked about before, of like, some things are right at certain stages of life, and then they change. Like, what you care about changes, and you have to be able to pay attention. And for us, it was just that Chicago had run its course, and it was beautiful. We were thankful for it, but it was time to get out to LA. And some of that outdoors activity, I think, was really nurturing for us and helped us get back to ourselves a little bit. But then when after we've been out here for a couple of years, that anxiety started really coming back, and a lot of those symptoms started resurfacing. And it's kind of the old saying of wherever you go, there you are. And unless you start really working on some things internally, you can change your external environment as much as you want to, but it's only a distraction. That change has to come from within. And sure enough, it caught back up to me after being out here for a few years.
Is that Wayne Dyer?
I don't know.
It feels like a Wayne Dyer quote.
I only know it because my mother says it to me.
Sounds like a Wayne Dyer quote. Just for some understanding of certain things. So what was that? What was that year? I have some personal curiosity here. What was that year of the polar vortex in Chicago? Do you remember? Was it like 2016-ish, 17?
It was around there, yeah.
I was in Chicago around that time. I was in Chicago, so I was working for Groupon at the time, and I was in training. And they put me up, I think, for 2 weeks for training at their headquarters in Chicago. You might be familiar with where that is and whatever. But
Yep.
Chicago's pretty small and compared to New York City, let's say. And so where they put me up was kind of like across town. And they gave me a stipend for travel every day to take the cab or Uber to the location. But what I decided to do with that stipend, I don't recommend this, everyone, because I actually did not get reimbursed for this. But what I decided to do with that stipend was I decided to rent their essentially their city bikes. For New Yorkers know that one, but they're like rental bikes around town. And I decided to rent their bikes instead of taking an Uber and ride that bike to and from the office so that I could save that stipend, that $100 a day for steaks and go into steakhouses every night. Because I was like, I'm in Chicago. I want to try and experience all the best steaks there are. So
yeah. I'm surprised you had hands from the frostbite to even be able to eat the steaks.
So I would have to. So that's why I asked the polar vortex question, because I try to explain to people, I'm like, it was the coldest year in Chicago. I had my ski gloves and all my different things that I have with me just to pack for winter because I knew it was going to be cold. But I would have to stop at the hotel. So the hotels there are prepared for this. They all have those overhangs with like heat just blasting down. And so I actually had to make probably like 2 or 3 stops along the way in order to warm my hands, to your point, my hands back up to be able to continue, because everything else was fine. It was my fingers that would go numb. And I also have, I'm drawing a blank on the disease I have that turns my hands white. But I'm drawing a blank on whatever that's called. But anyway, so that was my experience in Chicago. It was awesome. It was freezing that year, and the steaks were well worth it. I hit up several like small, like I didn't go to Michael Jordan's. I didn't go to the Chicago Bears coach. I didn't go to their steakhouses as much as I'm a big Jordan fan. I looked for where is that like one place that's been here for 100 years, and I had the best steak. The next question I have for you in terms of this travel that you had is. So at the time when you moved, you were working for the organization, yes? Okay.
Yes.
And now if you can help us just kind of start seeing, make some, draw some lines here. When was the trip to Costa Rica? Was it in the move to LA, or was this after?
It was after we moved to LA. So having been in LA for a few years, that anxiety continued creeping back in, and it was during COVID too. So to go from traveling, I still, even though I wasn't traveling on airplanes that often, I was traveling every week. And then in COVID, you get dropped into this world, and it shook so many of us up and so many of our daily rhythms. So I know this isn't unique whatsoever, but to go from traveling like that to being totally stationary was a really big change of pace. And I had Zoom calls for 8 to 10 hours a day. And then after that, you are expected to go work, and your brain is just totally fried. It's so difficult to actually concentrate, the fatigue that you have, and it makes no sense from just a very like outsider perspective. When you're going through that, you're like, why am I so tired? I've done nothing besides sit all day. But when you literally just end one meeting, go to the next, 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 there are some changes that start happening in your brain, changes start happening in your body, and that stress builds up. It's just not a natural way to exist as like a human being. So a lot of that started really catching up to me. I was also still reporting out of our Chicago office. So I was getting started on the day much earlier, which meant that the days and there was nothing else to do really during COVID. So you just continued to work all day, every day. And that's when the anxiety attacks started coming back, and realized, this is probably not something that's going to be sustainable for me, and I've got to figure some things out. And that's really what precipitated the second big panic moment, where I picked up and went down to Latin America for another extended period of time to just get away. Because I never felt like put the words to burnout the way that I had. And I think there's something powerful about actually being able to call it a thing and describe it, and actually look that way. You can almost have like a container to hold it in. Like, okay, this is burnout. Okay, now what do we do with that? But prior to that point, I think I had probably experienced a lot of the symptoms and had a lot of those ebbs and flows, but I didn't have the real words to put on it. And now, I mean, these days, everybody's throwing burnout around because I think a lot of us really are. But for me, that was the first time I was able to really grasp it and say, okay, I have to do something with this. But I just didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I needed rest so desperately badly. And so that's why we picked up at that point and went down to Costa Rica. I just told managing director, where I'm out for a little bit. I got to take some time, and picked up, and we went down there for a month this time.
Wow, you went for a month. So in that time frame, so one of the questions I have that I'm sure everybody also has is how do you work up to asking for that time off? Because anybody working in a corporate setting knows how stressful it is to ask for time off, especially when you're working so hard and you have a team and you have management and you have these deadlines, and even just taking vacation. Like, I mean, I worked at an organization and they gave unlimited vacation. And when I spoke with HR about it, I was just like, how does this work? And they're like, nobody ever takes it. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, nobody ever takes it. And I'm like, how does that work? And they're like, well, because in order to take it, you have to meet your goals. And it's like, well, you could figure out where that's all going, right? So it's like almost a joke thinking about vacation when you're working in such high stress situations. So I'm curious on how you were able to work up to get to ask. And then I would love if you could share more about the things that you did while you were there for that month.
To get the courage to ask, I flipped the idea of risk on its head. Because generally we think about risk, we think about what happens if I do this. And what happens if I put in for this vacation? What happens if I quit my job? What happens if I take this trip? We think about the risk of doing something. The way that I flipped that on its head was, what's the risk of not doing this? Because I was in a really tough spot. And I think a lot of people get to that point with burnout, but if we don't take care of ourselves, truly nobody else is going to. The importance that we place on work, on our job, and what we give to our company is so misaligned with the importance that our work, our job, or our company places on us. We identify with it. We go above and beyond. We take on more responsibilities without any pay increases. We just continue to pour ourselves into our work for the betterment of the shareholders, for the betterment of whoever, somebody else, and certainly not us. And in a moment's notice, that company, which is not a living, breathing, feeling thing, it's just a corporate entity, will always do what's best for whoever the shareholders are. And they can turn around and let you go in a heartbeat. And that disproportionate importance in that relationship has always struck me throughout my career. And I wanted to finally take a little bit of control for myself and do something for me and put myself first, because I knew what the risk was of continuing on. And when I asked that question of myself of what happens if you don't do this, it flipped it on its head, and it made me really pause, because I could see what that path was. I could see how unhappy I would be. I could see these demons that I would continually have to fight. But by flipping the question on its head, I realized that, yeah, it's going to be scary as hell to take a month off, to get the courage to ask. Absolutely, it's going to be scary. But it's a lot less risk than if I just continue on in the same way.
What a great way, too, in terms of speaking about the entrepreneurial journey. What a great way, too, to start stepping into taking risk for yourself and realizing that sometimes, like as Tony Robbins says, sometimes you got to burn the boats. And realizing, you just might have to. Fortunately for you in that moment, because of timing in terms of everything, you didn't have to do that quite yet. But it's so great, because every time that we can experience something at a very small scale, wherever we are in our lives or whatever we're trying to do, at a very small scale, it sets us up for when we decide to do it at a larger scale, because we could tap into the strength. And as you mentioned before, with the 100 squats, it's the same concept. Is is you're building that mental toughness in order to be able to do it in a different circumstance and situation. And by the way, I don't know how you know my kitchen, but quite literally, what you described is it's not under the kitchen sink, it's under one of the kitchen cabinets, and the mixing bowl is behind a bunch of. I was like, man, does he know my kitchen? This is crazy.
I sound like a similar kitchen setup.
So tell us now. So you went on this trip, and this was a life-changing experience for you and your wife, and to the point where you started this company that like I said, when we watched the travel vlogs, I mean, this is some awesome experiences that you're offering to organizations and to individuals and to people that have been in your shoes. So share with us that first initial moment of being there in Costa Rica with your wife for that first month.
Yeah, I oftentimes feel like a walking cliche where it's like, well, this guy just like went to Costa Rica for a month and started a company bringing people to Costa Rica. It's like, yes, that is certainly a way that this can be framed, and does feel a bit like a walking cliche. But Latin America for me has been an area that I have always been drawn towards. I've been down there, I think over like 40 times at this point, for all over the region. It's just a place that I've found myself drawn towards, where I can just slow down a little bit and get a chance to connect with myself. So that was similar to when I picked up and went down to El Salvador after dropping out of law school. It was just kind of like, well, what do I do? I'm going to go down to Latin America somewhere, and we're just going to chill out and figure out what's going on. And I mean, as soon as it takes a little bit, like where we were pretty deep in the jungle in a pretty remote area. So it took some time to get there. And I love going to places that are a little bit harder to get to, because as you're making those journeys, you can feel the separation that occurs between the world that you exist in your day-to-day and where you're heading. And it gives you that space over that journey to really realize that we're going somewhere different. This is not going to be like being back home in LA, and we were going deeper and deeper into the jungle, and you just kind of start to feel that sense of peace, that release and that relief that comes with it. And so as soon as we got there, it felt like relief. I was in a pretty tough mental place at that time. The best way I could describe it is it just felt like my brain was so tangled. And I didn't even know how to begin untangling it. But while we were there, we did one-on-one surf coaching every day. We were out in the water, no matter what. I think there's only one day that they called it where it was a little bit too big out back, but it didn't matter how big the waves were. If you thought, oh, I don't know that I can get out, we were still paddling out, and we still got out there. We did it. So that was just that movement, and that ability to push my edge and to connect with my body and to connect with nature was so impactful for me. We also practice yoga every day. So just that mindfulness and getting a chance to slow down and really appreciate kind of my own body and can create that sort of connection between my mind and my body. And then we also, we were in the middle of nowhere, so there's nothing to do at the time, but the place that we went had 10 open spots, and it was just kind of rotating as far as who would come through. So while we sat there for a month, we had people coming in from all over the world who were just like, some people were leaving on Wednesdays, some people on Sundays, and there's always new people coming in. And what was so impactful about that was we would just sit around after breakfast. We'd sit around after dinner. You just talked, because there's no TVs. There's nothing, like nowhere to go. So we would just sit and talk. And I mean, it was just a really great form of like talk therapy for me for a while there, where you share your story on day one, and then the way you're telling it a week later is a little bit different. And then the way you're telling it a week later is a little bit different. And you hear these things that you're saying out loud. You're like, wait a second, I didn't even know that was a thought in my head. And you get a chance to really step back and like almost observe your own behavior in those circumstances and watch it unfold over the course of that month. So all of that conversation for me was legitimately just like going to therapy almost twice a day. And then we were moving our body with the surf, which is also a very mindful activity, and then getting to practice yoga every day. So kind of with all three of those things together, it helped me start untangle my brain a little bit. It was just the beginning of the process, because in the process, it's still going on today through therapy, through mindfulness. And I think you're always kind of tangling it, untangling it, untangling it. But that was a really big moment for me of learning how to start untangling it. I started feeling joy again in ways I hadn't in so long. Just this I can remember a very distinct moment walking down the beach and thinking like, I'm getting chills even saying this, but like how long have I been this numb? It just felt like I wasn't like experiencing life. I was just reacting from thing to thing, going on the plane or the train or wherever because I was told building this deck, building this spreadsheet on this Zoom call because it's what you're supposed to do. The idea of success and everything that I'd been chasing and everything from the career perspective, I just kind of started realizing I've just always been told kind of by society, by culture, what we're supposed to be. And I certainly had agency in that and made some choices along the way and continued to follow it. But what I really started to understand and what started happening on that trip was I started feeling like a separation between that identity and everything I had always believed to be true about myself and about what I should be doing in the world. I started feeling myself remove from all of those preconceived notions, which was a little bit of a scary thing because when you start to step away from that, you open up that box, it's a box that you can't really close. And it was the beginning stages for me of that exploration of realizing that everything that I'm told doesn't have to be true. And everything that our society says that success is doesn't have to be true. I get to choose what I think success is. And that was such a powerful realization for me while I was down there.
That's awesome. Yeah. You mentioned the surfing, the yoga, and the talking, which is kind of like therapy. And I've experienced therapy myself, and I have a coach, which I sometimes, I don't confuse it with therapy, but sometimes it's almost like she is my therapist, right?
Yeah.
But reason why I bring that up is that what you mentioned in all of that, by having the conversations, by having this like verbal journal, which is what it kind of is, of sharing your experiences, what your thoughts are, what you once used to do and what you want to do and your vision, and you're sharing this with strangers or with people that you've created new relationships with in the lobby there. You're being mindful in the moment of hearing these stories over and over again, because that's what happens is that you start repeating things. Maybe the first time you didn't hear it, maybe the second time you didn't hear it, but the third time you're just like, whoa, I must have said that to like 4 different people. What is that? And that reflection is essentially what therapy is. I mean, a therapist or a coach kind of reflect things back to us in order for us to kind of, what is that? Why did I say that? Oh, okay. And we kind of get those guardrails from them. But that's essentially what you went through. So 100%. Another thing to note for everybody is what I love what you talk about is going deep into the jungle and the surfing and being really surrounded by this whole new environment. And, we talk about connection with nature. We say, go connect with nature, go for a hike, go for a walk. You were like, you were completely saturated in nature between the jungle and being in the ocean. You were totally experiencing nature. And it's no wonder that in that moment, like you said, where, it was out of the box, is that when you have that connection with nature, we realize how small we really are and how like, what are we like? I mean, again, the whole cliche things, like you look at the grains of sand on the beach as you're walking and it's like, that came from a giant rock. And it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. It took a long time. And so when we look at our existence in this universe, it's like we're only here for like just like a spit of time. And what are we doing with that time? And so this analogy came to mind as you were talking about it, and I've used it before, and I love this one, which is we can't read the label from inside the jar. And when you're reconnecting in that way, like you did with your wife at that time, it's almost like, so sometimes a coach or a therapist, they can help us, read the label because we're in the jar and they're helping us read the label from outside. But you literally climbed out of the jar and were like, I'm reading the label and actually I don't like this jar, so I'm out of here, dude. And I love that. I really do. And so now you had this wonderful experience, this reconnection with nature. You and your wife, I'm sure, you built some really great relationships. You were able to talk through a lot of the things, and I'm sure you started creating this vision. So walk us through the next phases here, because, I mean, this is really the build-up to the company that you started.
It is. When we left there, I knew that I wasn't going to go back to work. So the first night.
This is why they don't give us a month off, people.
This is exactly why so we have a board of advisors, and I had a call on Monday with our board, and somebody had just taken a sabbatical, and there was a joke being thrown around like, yeah, last person who took a sabbatical quit their job and started a company. So yeah, that was it's definitely a bit of a risk there.
Yep.
But the first night we were in Costa Rica, I dreamt that I quit my job. The second night we were there, I dreamt that I quit. The third night we were there, I dreamt that I quit. So I looked at Kelly that third morning, my wife Kelly, and I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I can't go back to this. So when we returned, it was February, bonuses got paid out in March, so I wasn't going to be like a complete idiot and jump ship right before bonuses got paid out. So I waited till right afterwards, put in my notice. But in that time frame, I knew that I was going to come back to Latin America for work in some way, shape, or form. I knew that I wanted to help people who were going through those ebbs and flows that happened throughout the course of our career, throughout the course of our lives. I know that my experience isn't unique of feeling burnt out. We all go through that. But I felt like I was in a really unique position to be able to create something that helps people who are going through that. So a lot of the work that I had done in the consulting world was in leading offsites, in facilitating different workshops. That type of work comes very natural to me. So I knew that there was a crossover between the two of those. I just didn't know what it looked like. So as we got back from Costa Rica, I did a lot of journaling, I did a lot of synthesizing, just talked to a lot of people about what was going on, kind of what I was thinking. And this idea started to emerge where we could take groups of people down to Costa Rica or somewhere like that and give them the space to slow down and focus on themselves. We knew we were, I know the professional world, I know what those demands are like. And I know I have the ability to speak to that, but I also understand the world of wellness pretty well and understand mindfulness and have my own practice and have certifications and trainings in that area too. So I knew that there is a really healthy blend between the two that I could pull together. So through conversations, I just started talking to friends who I thought were in the target demographic and said, hey, if you were to go on a trip like this, what would be important to you? We just started workshopping and started getting some ideas together. And then I put together a little bit of an outline. And I did interviews with probably like 25 or 30 people who I thought were in the target demographic, who were in my network. We started putting this together. We started shaping it and got to the point where we ran our first retreat in July of 2022 down in Nosara, Costa Rica, which is different from where we had stayed when we were down there. But Nosara is it's on the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, which is one of 5 blue zones in the world. They're places where people live longer and healthier than anywhere else. And Nosara is pretty much the wellness epicenter of the Nicoya Peninsula. So the types of people that are there, the infrastructure that's there to support holistic well-being. I mean, you can find absolute world-class instructors and facilitators in Nosara. We've been really fortunate to build some awesome relationships with some people down there who we work with locally to create these experiences. And that all began in July of 2022 when we ran our first retreat.
Yeah, those blue zones are pretty cool. I recently learned about those where the people live well past being 100 years old. And when in the one that I learned about, it was a Netflix documentary with Zac Efron, and they visited a blue zone. And so I was able to visually see it, not experience it the way that you just described. But you start seeing how, you know, when you were talking about escape and well, you didn't call it escape, but more of separation and slowing down in these environments of these blue zones, at least from what I witnessed from this show, is things are slower there. Things are slower pace, and it's more, and I really want to get into some of the mindful tips that you have, because I know that you have some great stories that back these, but it's that mindfulness of realizing, hey, you know, I'm just picturing the old Italian guy that was putting on his tie. It's like, you know, it's like I'm tying a tie, and that's what I'm doing in this moment. I'm tying a tie, and then I'm going down the stairs, and then I'm drinking my espresso, and it's really that mindful. Before we jumped on, I was telling you that I'm in the middle of I'm just going to be ending a 72-hour fast. And I'm not doing it for health benefits. I'm not doing it for weight loss. I'm doing it for a fundraiser for Forgotten Children of Haiti, a non-for-profit that my family had once started back in 1993, and kind of carrying on its mission. I'm bringing this up because in the fasting state, we become more mindful. I was telling you that I lost a lot of energy in the fasted state. But what it's done for me, and that I recognize, is that, I'm waking up and I'm walking slower, and I'm really feeling all of my movements kind of because I have to, because I'm really, in all honesty, I'm not feeling exactly like myself. And so, but that's like mindfulness, is feeling every movement, and how that kind of just slows things down and put things in perspective. Just tie it back to the Blue Zone people. It's no wonder they live for so long. It's incredible.
It is, yeah. And that slower pace, and I think one of the things, and we can talk about this later too, but that really stands out to me about that is when you contrast it with our culture, is the idea of boredom. And we're so anti-boredom in the States. In a lot of Western society, we just, like, you pull out your phone, you scroll on Instagram, you listen to podcasts as you walk along the street, you're just like, you've got the news on in the background, you're reading a book. We don't ever just sit and allow ourselves to be bored. We have this nonsensical concept that boredom is bad, but so much goodness comes from boredom. And when you have that slower pace, when you are more mindful, when you are more aware, and you can step into a state where you're bored for a bit, it's amazing the things that can surface.
Yeah, I'm gonna blame grammar school teachers for that, at least mine, for that one, because anytime I daydreamed, I'd get in trouble. And it's just like daydreaming, like when you think about daydreaming as an adult, and what you and I know about wellness, it's like daydreaming is when you're tapping into that other universe like that. That's when you're tapping into everything. And it's like, you know what? Right now, maybe the concept that you're teaching me is not important. This daydream is the most important thing. But they beat you up and bring you back. Speaking of bringing us back, I'm interested in, you mentioned, we can talk more about the retreats, and we certainly will. But you did mention some of the mindful stories. We had talked about it right before, and I'm very interested in your theories or your thoughts on mindfulness, and some of the stories that you have that kind of connect and help everybody that's listening right now really understand, one, its importance, but also see how it plays out.
The first thing that I would say, and this is a little bit of kind of a hybrid of mindfulness and just taking care of yourself, but the importance of rest cannot be overstated. When you work as hard as a lot of us do, and you push your body, you push your mind so hard, you have to rest just as hard. Think about just like if you're on your phone all day, you're playing videos, you're texting, you're emailing, you just got that, you're on your phone all day. By the end of the day, your battery is going to be a heck of a lot lower than it is if you just left it sit there all day. So you have to spend more time charging your phone. Makes a whole lot of sense. Our bodies are no different. If you think about like your mind as a pond, and every input that we get every day is like throwing a rock into the pond. Some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger, but it's the text messages, the emails, it's the conversations we have. It's when we're driving, all the signals and the noise that's happening out there, the notifications that we're getting, scrolling through Instagram, all these things are like throwing rocks into the pond. And at the end of the day, we're just kicking up so much water. It's just a freaking mess. The muck at the bottom of the pond is all kicked up and you can't see anything. But when you rest and you slow down, you stop putting these inputs in. I'm not talking about rest being like sitting on the couch and watching Netflix. Like that's not rest. Sitting on the couch, scrolling your Instagram while watching Netflix. That's not rest. Your brain is not recovering. You're not letting it be idle. It's still focused. Its attention is being grabbed by something, and it's constantly being inundated with those inputs still. But when you actually do rest and you remove those inputs, all of a sudden that pond starts to get a little bit smoother. And when you can do it for a more prolonged period of time, all of a sudden you can see the reflections off the pond. And then you can start to see when the muck settles, what's going on within the pond. You can see through the water. You can see the unique nooks and crannies, the contours of the pond, where like the logs are, where the rocks are. Maybe they've shifted since the last time you actually had a chance to look. But that ability to see into our mind, that ability to be able to slow down and rest is so important, because otherwise, if we continue throwing these inputs in, we continue stressing ourselves so hard, eventually there's going to be erosion and there are going to be problems that happen with that pond. So that rest that we can get and being intentional with the way in which we do rest is so important. When you are somebody who is a high performer, who pushes really hard, you have to learn how to rest just as hard as you push.
I love that. And you're right. It's the, you're a high performer, and there's so many out there, and we see it online so much of hustle culture. And I think that there's this balance that you're speaking to here that's so important, in that, hustle. And I think the other word that you use is focus. So many people, and I'm sure ask you the same question, but ask me the same question, is how do you do so much? And it's by having focused attention. Is that in the moment, if I'm working on a project, if right now we're doing a podcast together, this is the only thing that I'm doing. I'm not doing anything else. I'm focusing my attention here. I just watched the roast of Tom Brady, and they joked about him and saying laser focus. But that's what it is. It's when you're laser focused, that's going to deplete a lot of energy, which is understandable, but you're going to accomplish so much more by having that laser focus in that moment. And then, same thing, like you just said, having that laser focus to rest and recalibrate. I love the analogy of the pond that you just shared, of like skipping the rocks and it getting filled and it just being mucky. And then, of course, when you kind of take that moment, it becomes clear and you can see your reflection and you can start seeing clearly. And I'm sure this is part of the experience that you offer in these retreats. So I want to take us back now to that 2022 retreat in July and share with us a little bit about what is the process that you take. First of all, let's go back to, so this is sand and salt escapes. And so when someone buys a retreat from you, what is the process that you take these high-level executives who are stressed out of their minds? What is the process that you take with them to start helping them kind of unwind and adjust to this new way of life for this time frame that you have them for?
So each of our retreats so we have retreats we offer for individuals, like what we're talking about here. Each of those lasts a week, and we host those in Nosara, Costa Rica. The entire purpose of the retreats is to give people space to slow down and focus on their own well-being. The tools that we use for that are movement, mindfulness, and conversation. We take care of everything for the guest so that they don't have to worry about planning anything. All of those inputs that we talked about before, we remove those for the guest. So you just have to show up and we'll take care of everything from there. So when we're in Nosara, for example, we have absolutely stunning accommodations that we stay in, about a 5-minute walk from the beach. It's a place called Quinn Surf Residence. If anybody wants to check it out, I could not recommend it enough. Beautiful, beautiful villa in Nosara, Costa Rica. So from everything from the accommodations that we stay in to having private chefs on site, the local instructors we work with. So I don't teach anything on the retreats themselves. We only work with local instructors who are just world-class experts in their craft. So we have movement classes in the morning with a local instructor. His name's John Mangona. John's classes are all about mindful movement, connecting the body, the brain, and the breath, a strong focus on biomechanics, just understanding how the systems of the body really work from a holistic perspective. So thinking about like the vestibular system and how do we do things like eye resets when we're staring at computer screens all day? How are we really understanding the way that like our eyes are actually part of our brain, and there's different resets that you can do too with like the back of your head because of the muscles that are being used when you're staring at the screens and can help reset your eyes. So we do a lot of work like that, really working with the fascia, working with the lymphatic system, and understanding how everything in the body is connected in a really pragmatic way that people can bring back and actually make differences when they return home. It's like I have my own morning routine between meditation and some somatic work, and a lot of that actually stems from the classes that we do with John in the morning. So we do those, and they're on the beach. So beautiful way to start the day. We have private chef Gracie Lopez, who cooks all of our food. So just amazing. Gracie's from Nosara. Amazing fruits, vegetables, just like the freshest stuff in the world. So we have that in the morning, and then we have about 5 hours of free time every day. So we'll hook guests up with like surf lessons, ATV tours if they want to do them, really amazing spa treatments, or sometimes people just like nap or hang out by the pool, go to the beach, do nothing. And then in the afternoon, we take a mindfulness class. So those classes are different every day. And the reason why they're different is because when we're back home, we just get ourselves stuck on autopilot. We're not trying new things in the way that maybe we used to do when we were younger. So we like to expose people to different types of mindfulness. So we'll do different kinds of yoga classes. We'll do breath work. We'll do sound baths. We'll paint by the beach. We work with a local artist who brings canvases and easels and acrylic paint, and we paint at the beach at sunset. And then we have dinner back with Gracie on site. And then on the first night, the middle night, and the last night, I facilitate some conversations that are more reflective and help people just process a little bit about what they're experiencing back home, what they're experiencing on their retreat, and just tune into themselves in a different kind of way. Because when you check all of that baggage at the door and show up as yourself, we can create a really safe space for people to be able to share, to reflect, and do some of that work, and see some of those things when we're not throwing the rocks in the pond all week.
That is so cool. You're, I'm like, as you were telling me all of that stuff, and people have been sending me pictures of cake and food. People being my brother, trying to get me off of my 72-hour fast. None of that bothered me. None of it bothers me. I'm like, whatever. I'm like, I'm in my fast. It doesn't bother me. But as you were telling me about this retreat, and you're talking about like the beach and painting and the chef and all, now I'm salivating. Not for food.
You ready?
Not for food, but straight up I'm like, how can I get my wife and kids to go on a retreat with me like this? Because this is awesome. It's something that I think about very often. We think about experiences, and as business owners today that you and I are, and as executives that we once were, the experiences that we have are they're tremendous. When you think about corporate retreats and being able to go and do something with your colleagues outside of the office, and how you just start bonding in a different way, and it really translates into your work. Especially if you're in a corporate, and I want to say this intentionally, especially if you're in a corporate career that you really enjoy, which is wonderful, and we totally encourage, is that when you do these kinds of retreats, when you do experiential type of things together, it bonds you, but it also kind of adds a refresher to the office life. And you're like, all right, cool. Let's get another 3 months in, and next quarter, let's go hit the slopes. Let's go to the beach. Let's go it's just such a reinvigorating way. And as entrepreneurs, we're fortunate because we get to add it to somewhat of our daily routines on a smaller scale. I sent a picture to my mom the other day. She was asking me, how are you doing with the fast and everything? I said, well, I have a great office. And I sent her a picture of my office, and it was it's a chair in my backyard in the grass. And there was umbrella over it in the shade. And I'm like, that's my office today. I'm sitting outside just enjoying the nice weather. So we as entrepreneurs can make decisions for ourselves to be able to work in different environments and take time and say, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to do what I need in order to be mindful. And I want to bring this back to you in terms of being the founder of an organization like you have, knowing that nutrition, that mental health, that sleep, that rest and recovery is so important. And at the same time, you bootstrapped a company. You have a board of directors, if I'm not mistaken here. You have people that are counting on you. You have employees and team members that are counting on you. And so the level of stress that you once left, different type of stress, you've now almost kind of reinvigorated. And I might be using the wrong word in terms of stress, but I'm curious, as everybody is, how do you now find the balance of having this great mindset that you have and great routines, and at the same time work at a high level?
It's not easy at all. I have good days, I have bad days. I think to the point you made earlier, though, when you learn how to practice mindfulness, when you have a good therapist and you have the support systems in place, it makes it much easier to handle what is objectively more stress and more pressure now, but having the tools to be able to navigate that is the biggest game changer for me. And that shows up in terms of like the support systems that I have. It shows up in terms of the daily rhythms that I have. So I start every morning. I'm not one of those crazy people who wakes up at like 4 a.m., takes a cold plunge and does all of like the crazy stuff that I then post on Instagram. That's not my morning routine. I generally wake up closer to like 7:30, like a normal person. And but I do have my own morning routine where I meditate, I do some brushing, I do some lymphatic massage on myself just to get that moving. And depending upon kind of where my body's at, I might do a little bit more movement, just do like some like cars or controlled articular rotations and things like that to lube up the joints a little bit and just feel myself in my body. But that's one thing that I always prioritize every morning. And there have been some mornings where I have not done it, and you can feel a difference every time when you don't. And that's pretty non-negotiable for me. Every morning is just that morning routine. I'm incredibly conscious as well of like social media and watching TV. We don't really watch TV. Try to stay off of that. Try to stay off screens as much as possible, because I think that there's a lot on your plate when you're an entrepreneur and when you're running a company. And we oftentimes, I think, can get very overwhelmed by that. So when we're inundating ourselves with more just unnecessary scrolling, with watching different things on the television, versus like yesterday, I was feeling pretty stressed and had some time in the afternoon. I just got up and I went and walked. Fortunate to live by the beach out here in LA, and just like went and I just walked the beach for an hour and a half, and I came back. My mental state was so much different than it was when I left, and I was able to actually sit down and get some things done. But just kind of those small recognitions and learning how my body likes to function, and not when I'm struggling to concentrate or I'm feeling really anxious going, I just got to push through, instead saying, hold on, what's going on here? And what might I be able to do to actually address this versus trying to push through, because that usually ends up being counterproductive anyway. So yeah, it's been a very helpful thing starting a company that is entirely focused on mindfulness, because it's a great way to keep you accountable to your own practice.
Yeah. And, it's a huge mindset shift. We were talking about mindset before jumping on, and it's a huge mindset shift, because I love what you said here is that, the stress, the stress and the pressure, it's almost the same, and as you said, it's objectively maybe even more, but you now have the tools. And I love that, and here's why I love it. Because everybody listening is in different places in their lives. You're all listening right now, and you might be working corporate, you might be thinking about founding a company, or you are, and you already are in that phase. And what we realize is that when we're in that moment, the pressure is always going to be around us. We never get away from it because we're achievers. We're not looking to be complacent. We're not looking to be status quo, fly under the radar, and just do the thing to get us to the next year of our life. If you're living that life, I know you're not listening to this podcast, so we're cool here. So we're all on the same page here, right? So the stress never goes away. So what do? It's the tools. I love that you said that. It's the tools that you start tapping into, the therapist, the coach, the mindfulness, the breathing, the exercise, all these different things that you start paying attention to, taking a walk on the beach. And then the other part I love of this is when we think about our days and we go, well, I got too much on my plate. What is on my plate that perhaps I could eliminate? And if we're using food as an example, if our food is full of, it has some steak on it, has some vegetables on it, but also has a bunch of muffins and cake and candy on it, which would be our Netflix, our social media, and other things. Well, can we eliminate some of those things to make some more room? And that's the walk on the beach. That's the walk. I take the walks too. Those are the walks that we could start incorporating in our lives. But there has to be a mindset shift in order to start realizing that that's a priority to take the walk over pushing through, and another mindset shift in order to invest in ourselves, because there's a financial investment that comes into therapy and coaching and some yoga classes or whatever. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that mindset shift and some of the best ways to be able to make that shift.
Yeah, the big shift for me was realizing that the mornings that I say that I don't have time to do it, or when I think, oh gosh, I don't have 20, 30 minutes to do this. Um, it's again kind of going back to that idea of risk that we talked about before, of flipping it on its head and saying, do I have time today to not do this? Like, what's the impact of if I don't sit down and just connect with myself in the morning and pay attention and tune in? Those are the days where everything spirals out of control, where you don't have that intentionality with your time, where you're just reacting from thing to thing to thing to thing, rather than understanding what's happening and responding to it. So that to me was the big shift of realizing and it's also a practice. You're going to do it some days you won't. But when you stick with it for a consistent period of time and then you don't engage with your practice, you notice it. And that's when that shift starts to happen. So my encouragement to anybody listening to this would be to commit. If you're interested in kind of building out a mindfulness practice, whether that's meditation, whether that's yoga, or whatever that means for you, to commit to it for a period of time, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and just say, I'm going to do this. And then notice and it will happen, there will be days where you don't practice. Just pay attention and see, what was that day like? Maybe how was that related to me not engaging with my mindfulness practice? So I think that for me was a really big shift when I started to realize that the busier my day was actually more important for me to take that time to sit down and practice mindfulness, rather than when I've got all this wide open space. That generally is probably less of a need that day to engage with that practice. I still do it, but it's that was the flip in the equation for me.
Yeah, I notice it for me too. When I do more talks or more of my stressful thing. Meetings are great, coaching's great, prospecting, I'm fine with all of that stuff. But when it's time for me to give a talk or do a webinar or anything, that's when, as much as I love it, and it's like why I got in the business, and it's probably why I know I love it, because I love it and I want to push through it, and it's always a challenge for me. But I block off the day before, and I block off every minute leading up until the talk. And it's because I need to shift my mindset into the talk. I need to do my breath work. I need to do my meditation. I love self-hypnosis. That's something that I'm just in love with, especially when I don't hear, I listen to audio for the self-hypnosis. And I love when I come out of it and I'm like, I didn't even hear any of the audio. And that is when you went deep. It's like, that was awesome. But yeah, it's really stepping away from all of that stuff, all of that distraction. Something else I kind of want to dive into, it's maybe a shift of gears, but I think it's kind of along the same track here, is relationships. For you, cultivating meaningful relationships along the way has been vital to the founding of your company. I mean, I'm sure many of the people that sit on your board are through these relationships. I underline the word meaningful relationships, meaningful being the key here. And I'm curious on why, that's something that you wrote, meaningful relationships. I'm curious on how and why meaningful relationships are so important to you.
I have always been someone who just cares about people first. It's why I had some issues towards the end of my career, where I had a couple of direct reports who were going through some pretty significant personal milestones. And this was back when I was in the consulting days, and I was told at one point, you need to be spending less time supporting your people and more time out working with clients. And that was a real wake-up call for me, in that I wasn't going to be able to lead at that organization the way that was authentic to who I am as an individual. So when I started Sand and Salt Escapes, I realized that I get to build this sandbox, and I get to build something where we put people first above everything else. So one of the first things we did was get really clear on the values of the organization, which are also my values as an individual. So we talked about that earlier, but authenticity was the first one. Kindness was another one. Exploration of yourself in the world, and then simplicity. were the 4 values. And those have not just been words on our website or other assets, but we put them to work in the people that we select to come on the retreats, because they can't just go to our website and sign up for a retreat. We have to schedule a call, we have a conversation, and make sure that everybody who is joining is aligned and will be like very additive to the retreat experience itself. It's the same filter we use for all of our partners when we are working in Nosara, and we also run our corporate events in Palm Springs. So all of those relationships we have all been run through this filter. And we've let go of a lot of relationships. Early on, it was a challenging thing for me to really figure out how do we test these values really early and get to know that. So we've hired and let go of probably, I think, 12 or 13 different partners throughout the process. So it's been definitely a process of refining, but those values are the way that we put people first in everything that we do. So the guests that have come down on the retreats, we're so fortunate that they've become phenomenal friends. We're going down in a couple of weeks to run our 11th retreat now. And this one was invite only. We opened it up to only past guests from our first 7 retreats. And it sold out within 4 days. We had 16 people coming down. So it's just this like community and these friendships that have been born out of this have been phenomenal. You mentioned the advisory board that I built out. That's all made up of past guests, either from our work on the individual retreats or on the corporate offsites, who have been part of those experiences and have expertise in areas that are critical to the business. So back in August of 2023, I built out an advisory board because I knew that to help get the business to the next level, we needed more support. And I needed more support too, as an individual and as a leader. So that was, but those were all from relationships we had made through the retreats and through the offsites. And so everything that we do, it's always putting the relationship first. We go down before retreats, we go down a couple of days early, stay a couple of days late. We're getting breakfast, we're getting coffee, we're getting lunch with different instructors, our different partners down there, just catching up as people and making friends in the process. And that's, for me, like the most rewarding part of all of this is just, it's the people. And that's what we got to keep at the center of it.
I love that you were talking about that it's, you don't just take anybody. And I think, this is interesting because I was invited on a mastermind retreat, and the person had really great intentions. They really did. They were trying to help me with something I was working on in my business. And as he was sharing the retreat with me, he was talking about smoking cigars and drinking bourbon and shooting guns and doing all this other stuff, and as well as working on our business, which, by the way, they work on their business, high level people and all this other stuff. But it didn't make sense for me. It didn't align with me because I don't drink anymore and I don't smoke anymore. And shooting guns, I think, could be fun, but really doesn't entice me. So I was like, this is a cool retreat, but it's not right for me. And I think that that's so important that people recognize that, whether something is right for them. Sorry, there's a phone ringing in this office here, and I don't know.
It's the bat phone.
Yeah, it's the bat phone. Sorry, everyone. I've never had this experience here. But yeah, it wasn't the right retreat for me. And so what I'm curious on, you mentioned you're looking for people that are aligned and that, are willing to, break free and be accepting of certain things. So I'm just a little curious on some of the questions that you might ask somebody if they, were coming on, if they said, hey, look, I want to jump on this retreat. What are maybe 1 or 2 of the questions that you ask?
Yeah, so I can break that down into the retreats and then also for the offsites, because those are a little bit different in the way that we approach those and the kind of conversations we have.
That makes sense.
So for the individuals, the first question, it's like such a simple, easy question, but it's just, why are you interested in joining? And that right there will share a lot of like the intention behind it. We've had people who are just like, yeah, they're just looking for vacations. Nope, not like that's not what we do. It's like a vacation plus is the way I like to look at what we do. But if you're just coming down for just a vacation, and we've told people, nope, absolutely not. We've also had people reach out who are going through like very significant, almost like crises that we have said, hey, this is not going to be the place for you to come to. We're not mental health professionals, but here are some resources that might be helpful for you. So kind of getting a chance to parse those apart, and then just diving in and understanding more about who they are, and the things that are important to them, and making sure that they are people who are open and people who are kind. Those are the two things that I've always got in the back of my head in an introductory conversation is this person open and is this person kind? And you can usually parse those apart pretty quickly. But those are the two biggest things that we're always looking for. And then when we're talking with a potential client on the corporate side, and we've had to walk away from a lot of business over there because we'll have organizations reach out and they want to run like an incentive compensation trip for their top salespeople. And that's not, I've been on those, I'm familiar with those. That is not what we do with this work. So we've walked away from a lot of deals on that side, but we're always looking for leaders who genuinely care about their people as human beings and want to invest in them as human beings, because these tools around mindfulness, they're so impactful in the way that they can change your perspective and the way that you see the world. And they also can change, the relationships that you have with your colleagues, which you were mentioning before. Like that's such an impactful piece of this when we're sitting there with an executive team and you've got 7 people who haven't explored some of these types of conversations before. But if we have a leader who genuinely cares about their people as human beings and has built a culture of openness within their organization, it's a beautiful, beautiful synchronicity.
Yeah. And what you find, and you could probably attest to this, is that people stay longer in those jobs. I know, I think it was Adam Grant's book I was reading and just kind of like studying some of this, and that, people don't leave jobs because of a pay raise. They'll say that. That's kind of like, that's the symptom that they're going to say is I should be getting paid more and all this other stuff. But it's really about feeling appreciated, feeling that, their work matters. And by doing things like this, it certainly helps that. I love this, by the way. This is like so cool, as I kind of like was able to break away from learning that you're not a travel vlogger and learning about the type of business you actually have. It's like, it taps into so many different things. I'm just like, oh my goodness, I got to collaborate with this guy. I got to do something with him because it's so in tune with the things I love and enjoy practicing. But before we really conclude, I want to just dive into a little bit of the entrepreneur space here with you, because you've done so much from going from corporate to becoming an entrepreneur, and you have so many lessons to impart with everybody. And one of the things that I read about you that you said is, the faster you can get a viable product in front of people, the faster you'll learn and adapt. And so I'm just curious on some of the other ideas or maybe, thoughts of wisdom that you have that you might be able to share. I think an advisory board is another great place to start with this, because that's another great idea that you're sharing with all of us today, in that, get some smart people around you in order to help move your mission forward.
Absolutely. That's been a game changer for me. In August, I built, realized, August of this past year, I realized that to get the business to this next stage of growth that we need to get to, I can't keep going at this kind of alone. I need some formalized advisors. I had people who were mentoring and helping in pockets, but I wanted to formalize it. I wanted to be able to tackle real meaty issues with them. So that was a huge benefit for the last, 9 or so months now at this point, where we've met once a month. I send out a deck ahead of time with the issue that we're going to tackle, and we get in, I just facilitate like a 90-minute working session with a group of people who have been on the retreat or the offsite before, who understand it and are so excited to help. And that's been a really helpful thing for me, is knowing that being an entrepreneur can be really lonely. It's something that not a lot of people go through, so not a lot of people understand, which makes a lot of sense. But when you can accept that and realize that it is a lonely experience, but that just means that when you find those people who do get it and who can support, it makes it that much more meaningful. So finding that right support system has been huge for me. Another thing that has been really influential in the way that I lead the company, and this will sound a little woo-woo at first, but give me a second to explain. I do my utmost to slow down and let the business tell me what it needs to be, rather than making the business what I think that it should be. And what I mean by that is, So many times we get in our own head about what something should be and like what we're going out to create. And you just have like this goal and this thing that you're like, this is what I'm doing. But when we get so focused on that, we miss so many of the signals that are going on around us. We almost have blinders as we're marching along this singular path. So I'm very very in tune with what the ethos is of the work that we're doing, with what our mission is, but allowing it to take whatever form that it needs to for us to accomplish that has been a really big leap of faith. And there's a very interesting parallel with mindfulness with that too, because the way that we experience the world that we talked about before is through our bodies. Our minds interpret it, but we experience the world through the body. So slowing down and listening to our bodies is a really helpful way for us to be present, to understand what's going on. The way that we experience being an entrepreneur is through the business. That's how we're an entrepreneur. So when we can slow down and we can pay attention and we can see what's happening in different aspects of the business and be able to observe it from a non-biased, non-judgmental perspective, you can start to see the signals that exist there, and you can see things a little bit differently because you're not just jamming it down to be what you think it's supposed to be or what you want it to be. Because ultimately, as an entrepreneur, what you want it to be is like, that's all well and good, but it all matters what the market cares about. So getting a chance to listen to the business and understand what's happening versus making this thing be exactly as I think that it should be has been a huge process of letting go for me. But at the same time, it's allowed me, I think, to move in sync with the business in a way that has allowed us to really iterate so quickly and move. I mean, we've run 11 retreats in the first 24 months. We sold out all of 2024. We've got our corporate work that's just rolling. We're actually starting up a second company that's going to be entirely focused on just serving corporate clients and separating that from Sound and Salt Escapes itself. But these are the things that when I started the company initially, I thought, I'm only working direct to consumer. I'm never touching anything corporate again. I hate that world. I want nothing to do with it. But then I just started paying attention and started seeing some signals, started getting reach outs from people in my network. I was like, oh, that's interesting. How might we explore that? What might that look like? But if I was so focused on that idea of the thing that I thought that it should be, we would have missed this entirely other magnificent opportunity to be able to make an impact in a space that I think really desperately needs it. So that idea of just being able to slow down and listen to what the business is telling me that it needs or that it should be, rather than just me projecting my own thoughts and my own perception of it, which is very limited, has been a massive shift in the way that I show up and I lead. But particularly, I think for running your own company as an entrepreneur, it's such a helpful mindset to have.
Yeah, that was a really great explanation of it. And I again want to echo the analogy there of your body. You experience the world through your body, or life through your body, and you experience the business. You experience what you need through the business. I love that. Couple questions for you. In terms of an advisory board, out of curiosity, and this doesn't necessarily have to be the way that you currently have your advisory board, but just curiosity in the sense of you obviously have been exposed to different types of advisory boards and made a decision on the one that you have. So you don't have to be as open and transparent as how you run yours. But I'm curious, is there compensation involved in an advisory board? Is there what are the benefits for people to join an advisory board? What's the ask of them, their commitment? And I ask this in a very general way for anybody that's curious on trying to create their own advisory boards, maybe different ways to hack it.
Yeah, the advisory board that we have set up is made up of 6 people. What was critically important to me was that everybody who was on the board was somebody who's experienced our service. So, and on kind of their own volition, not somebody that I talked to and convinced to come down early on or anything like that, but somebody who we didn't know beforehand or who had joined retreat and has expertise in a space that's very beneficial for the business. So that familiarity with the business was something that was really important to me, and making sure that we had people who were passionate about this subject, because that's going to go so much farther than if we've got people who know nothing about it or who don't have any passion about it. So familiarity and passion around the topic are, I think, very important for spinning up a board of advisors. I think it's also very important to have people who have expertise in areas that are important to your business. So understanding your business, business, understanding, is it like on the operational side of things? Is it from a design perspective? Is it from whatever it is for you in business development? But finding people who have expertise in the areas that are most important to your business is also something that's important. We do have compensation set up for our advisors, and we meet once a month for about 90 minutes. A lot of times it ends up going over, but we meet about 90 minutes every month, and I bring forward a subject that's really important for the business at that time. And I'll kind of plan a different type of facilitated activity of way that we're going to solve for it for each conversation. And then we go at it. And I think it's, for me, in leading those two, what's been so important is making sure that I communicate, not just communicate, but also set the model, the behavior that I'm not looking for rubber stamped ideas. I don't want people to get like, the job of the board of advisors is not to get on here and tell me like, you're doing a great job. This looks great. Awesome. That's not it. I need to be challenged. I want to be challenged. I want differing opinions. I want different perspectives. So I'm been very clear about that with the charter of it and in the communication. But then when those differing opinions, when the challenges come up, that's when, as a leader, you also have to react in a way that does continue to create space for that behavior in the future. Because that's been some of our most influential decisions and influential things that have come from those meetings have been things that caught me off guard, things that challenged me, and you can feel that freaking amygdala response firing in your brain and knowing that like, oh, okay, this is like, I'm starting to feel myself get like defensive about this. But that mindfulness, again, is so helpful because you can recognize that and then you don't react in that way. But those challenges to the way that you're thinking about things are so important, because otherwise we just get in our own little bubble. We do the things that we think are good. But again, going back to the idea of like letting the business tell you what it's going to be, surround yourself by people who are really freaking smart in the areas that are really important to your business. And you'll get some good ideas, but you've got to be open to actually being challenged and truly want that and react in a way that you're not showing up with maybe some biases and some kind of old ways of thinking.
Yeah, the feedback is so crucial. You're making me think about, just in terms of public speaking, of when I ask for feedback from a workshop or after a workshop or something, and I receive, like you just said, it was great, it was awesome. It's like, okay, cool, but that's not why I'm asking for the feedback, because that feeds a different part of me that I actually don't need. I don't need the ego to be fed. I'm not here for the ego. I'm here to be able to create change in your life and transformation. And so I need the feedback of what can I do better, or what landed and how can I dive deeper in it. And so what I learned with that, and I'm sure you've learned as well, is it also has to do with the questions that we ask, is to ask more specific questions about what we're doing, and to have this curious mind of, okay, and why are you thinking of it that way? So I think I love that you shared that. And I also appreciate your transparency in terms of how your board operates. I think that's really helpful for everybody listening right now, including myself, by the way, of how an advisory board can work. There's obviously a multitude of ways. This is the way that it works for you.
It's just what works for me. I have a familiarity with boards from my corporate life, but this was kind of me just sitting back and saying, hey, what's going to work best for what we need right now? And I didn't try to model it after anything. I just tried to make it what was going to work for us. So yeah, there's a ton of different ways to do it.
Yeah. And it's certainly, a great way to, I'm going to use this as kind of like a marketing piece too, because when you bring in these people who have, one, experienced it, and then now are bought in because they're starting to be able to share their ideas with you and kind of game play a little bit with you. And there's some sort of element of, you mentioned compensation, so there's some sort of element of, hey, I get a little bit out of this too. Well, boy, you just built not just a great advisory board that can help promote, that can help build the business, but also one that can help promote the business, because they have a little bit to gain out of the success of the business. So it's like we think about, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank on the phrase that's used, but your biggest advocates for your business, well, you've just built them out of your advisory board. So it's a brilliant idea.
And the compensation we offer is a free retreat.
That's awesome. I mean, that's awesome.
So yeah, it just keep people in it, keep people feeling it, and yeah, so the community that gets built, and nobody on the board knew each other ahead of time, but just seeing the relationships that have spun up from that, and the conversations that people have outside of board meetings, like that's the stuff that gets me so excited.
Yeah, yeah. It's evangelist, the word that I was looking for, is that
Yeah.
so often we hear in terms of building businesses is that you want to find your evangelists, the people that are so bought into what you do, so bought into your mission, so bought into your values that they're sharing it with the world, because that is the best form of marketing. You can do marketing campaigns, ad campaigns, social media, do emails, all the rest. That's all wonderful. But it's the people, it's the word of mouth. It's the people that have gone on your retreats or whatever service you're selling or product you're selling that have experienced it and that share it with their friends and family. That's how people buy. I mean, I know that for myself. When I'm looking for something, all I got to do is just go to my Chamber of Commerce. I just go through my business cards. Oh yeah, I met this person. Let me give them a call, because it's out of that. Or asking somebody, hey, who do you know that I can? This is how we buy. And so when you could build out evangelists, I mean, that's just tremendous. I want to ask you about patience, and I'm going to frame it in this sense, in that you were talking about when you went on the retreat with your wife. Well, it wasn't a retreat at the time, but when you took the month-long sabbatical, you started learning how to surf. And every day you went out and surfed. And today you listen to your business. And every day you kind of let your business guide you into the direction that it's headed. And to me, that goes into patience, of being patient, of learning and learning new things and learning new experiences and being a beginner in new experiences and new things. And so I'm just curious on your mindset on patience.
I struggle with patience. Whew. It's very funny. So I've been officially running this company so I started it about 2.5 years ago. I've been full-time in it after consulting days ended, just over 2 years from now. And when we step back and look at the last 2 years, and we've run 11 direct-to-consumer retreats, 4 corporate events, we've got more coming this year, and you're kind of looking at this going like, oh my gosh, when you tell people about it, a lot of times your reaction is, oh my gosh, that's amazing how like you've done all of that so quickly. And this is not to say that I have, because I have, like, in the way that I experience it internally, it has been so painfully slow, because I want to keep iterating. I want to keep pushing it. I want to move fast. And I mean, I've worked more hours in the last 2.5 years than I could ever count. And that's probably like why we've done about 5 years of work in about probably 2.5 years, is because of the sheer hours and the iteration and the smart people we've been very fortunate to have around through this process. But it feels like every day is kind of an eternity sometimes when you're running your own company and you don't really know of what to do next. But you want to keep pushing, and sometimes you need to sit in things and you need to listen and you need to pay attention. You need to understand. And that has been such a strong tension for me, of this consistent push towards action. Like, you want to move, you want to act, you want to move, you want to iterate. But sometimes you have to be patient. Sometimes you have to slow down and realize that you can't do something the way you want to at that moment. We've had, or maybe like with the different partners that we work with, sometimes I need to wait a few more days before I follow up with an email response, but everything is just like so important to me right now. I need to go push. So that ability to just be patient and slow down is one that I feel like I am constantly tested with. But I'm learning how to get better on that front. And kind of the way that I like to think about it is of just playing chess versus checkers. And sometimes when we're feeling very impatient, we're playing checkers. We're just like doing that next thing, and we're not being strategic, and we're just reacting to something, versus when we have patience and we can see the big picture. We can play chess. We can see 3 moves ahead if we just take a beat and slow down for a minute, and kind of listen and see what's going on. Then we can start to play chess and see around the corner. And when you kind of have those experiences where you realize, oh gosh, I've been playing checkers on this one, it teaches you pretty quickly that patience is important, even though you're just like, I'm feeling that tension, I'm wanting to go, I want to push. Sometimes you realize like you're going to go down the wrong path if you do that. So that's been my relationship with patience.
Yeah, and it's I mean, patience it comes in different ways, and you're talking about it in the terms of time. And I also think it's also about like we were just talking about earlier with the surfing. It's also learning. It's being patient to learn new things. And I didn't learn to surf like you did. I don't surf at all, by the way, but I did take a lesson in surfing, and so that's why I'm bringing this up. In that, when I took the lesson in surfing, I was like, I just want to get out and hit the waves with the surfboard. And, so the first morning I get out there and they have us on the beach on the sand, and it's learning how to get up on the surfboard. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like I just want to go out on the waves. Like I'm a boogie boarder, right? So I'm sure you don't care much for me right now. I'm what they call a sponge, as my brother-in-law who surfs calls me. But a sponger. I love boogie boarding. It's something I've always enjoyed doing, and I still do it. But anyway, so I'm like, oh, I know how to get out in the water, and come on, like, let's get out there. And then by not taking the time to learn how to truly get up on a board, I never got up on the board. I got out there, I hit the waves, and I'm like, I'm on it, and I'm paddling, and I'm like, all right, and I'm losing balance. I'm not figuring it out. And so patience is so important in learning and, like you said, iterating new things, because you have to really learn the little minute steps along the way. Otherwise, when you're trying to get up on that wave, it's never going to happen if you haven't taken the moment, the time on the beach, on the sand, to learn how to jump quickly onto your feet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how to actually get up on the board, how to like read the ocean, understand like what is a wave. One of the craziest things that blew my mind when we started learning how to surf was what a wave actually is. And so you always think about the wave as the water that's moving through the ocean. The wave is not the water. The wave is the energy. So that energy starts in a storm. Like we're out here in LA. That starts in a storm in the South Pacific, like off the coast of Southeast Asia, travels thousands of miles through the water. Because if you watch a wave like out in the ocean, the water kind of comes up and down. It's not the water that's actually moving. It's the energy that's come from that storm into the water that is kind of conglomerated and is moving in a certain direction. And then as that energy transfers all the way like thousands of miles and gets to the beach, when you start to have like sandbars or point breaks that are going to cause that energy to consolidate, that's when it creates the wave that then crashes. So when you get up on a surfboard and it feels like nothing else in the world, or that idea of stoke that people talk about, that's what you're feeling. Is you're feeling that energy that came from 2,000 miles away and actually transferred through your board and into your body. And like, that's what the feeling is with that. So just learning those types of things about surfing, though, and understanding, okay, like how do I identify where the peak is? Where do I need to paddle to? Do I need to be out farther? Do I need to be like a little bit closer in? Where am I supposed to be? How do I paddle? Probably all of those nuances are the things that, if you don't learn those ahead of time, you just get out there and you try to start winging it, like, you're just going to spend a lot of your time like in the water.
Yeah. And that's just a really great analogy to life and to entrepreneurship, is learning all of the nuances. And I love how you describe the energy in a storm, because I never knew that. And all the different things that are leading to your business and that are transforming around you, the industries that are transforming around you, the people, the centers of influence that you could tap into. All of this has to do with the entrepreneurial journey and building a business. It's an incredible business that you've built. It's one that is so needed out in the world, from corporate to entrepreneurs, to be able to take some time, to be able to take a moment to themselves and really be mindful. It's changed my life. It's changed my relationships. I know it has for you. As I conclude the show, I always like to learn about someone's mantra, or maybe a statement or something that is present for you today that kind of moves you and drives you forward.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier, but the idea of wherever you go, there you are, I think has been something that's really shown up for me throughout my life, because you can continue to change settings. You can continue to mix things up on that front. You can change jobs, you can move cities, whatever it is. But unless you're doing the work internally, you're still going to run into the same challenges. You're just going to show up a little bit differently because your setting is going to be a little bit different. So for me, realizing that and slowing down and doing that work on myself, so that that wherever you go, there you are is more of a positive thing rather than like wherever you go, there you are. Like there's all of your anxiety, all of the OCD, all of these things are like, they're still there. But to be able to do that work on yourself and realize that I can carry that feeling with me when, like yesterday, I went and I mentioned and walked by the beach for about an hour and a half to clear my mind. The beach for me has been a huge source of just calming. Whenever I'm stressed, I go there and I just sit and I get perspective. But that feeling of the beach it's not the beach that's the feeling. It's the feeling that's inside of me. So finding for you, for somebody listening to this, your beach, it's not maybe not going to be the beach for you, but there are things that can help us kind of access places within ourselves so that we can find that peace and we can do a little more reflecting on ourselves. So I love, like I said, love going to the beach, but that's all showing me something that's inside, and it's kind of wherever you go, there you are.
That's awesome. I love how you broke that down. And of course, for anybody who qualifies, I love that. For anybody who really aligns is really, obviously that was a joke, but for anybody who really aligns with what you do, for the corporate owners out there, for managers, for people that are looking for a new experience with their team, of course, this will all be in the show notes, but how can people find you and learn more about your programs, your retreats, and your on-sites?
Our website is sandandsaltescapes.com. It's sandandsaltescapes.com. Or feel free, so you can go on there, you can learn a lot more about the retreats, more about the offsites, more about our story, more about our advisors. But if you also just want to drop me a line directly, my email is max@sandandsaltescapes.com.
And that's really simple, keeping it simple. As I said, Max, this has been awesome. I love it when I love it when I have a guest on it. It's just everything aligns right. So this has been really, really cool having you on today. Thanks so much for coming on.
It's been an awesome conversation. Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
Thank you for listening to the Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast. Thank you again to our sponsor, Den 10 Insurance Services, helping businesses get the right insurance for all their insurance needs. Visit den10.io to get a quote. That's DENTEN.io. And remember, when you buy an insurance policy from Den10, you're giving back on a global scale. This episode was produced by Uncle Mike at the iHeart Studios in Poughkeepsie. Special thanks to Lara Rodrian for the opportunity and my team at Michael Esposito Inc.